when 3 high school bullies decided to humiliate their new substitute teacher with a bucket of ice water. They had no idea they were about to face someone who had survived Hell Week at Navy SEAL training. What happened next would change their lives forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Madison Carter stepped through the metal doors of Roosevelt High School at exactly 7:15 a.m., her worn leather messenger bag slung over her shoulder and a thermos of black coffee in her hand. The October morning in Millbrook, Pennsylvania carried that sharp bite of approaching winter and the fluorescent lights inside the building felt harsh against her tired eyes. She'd been substitute teaching for 3 months now, bouncing between different schools in the district, trying to find her footing in civilian life after 8 years in the Navy. The hallways were already buzzing with teenage energy. Lockers slamming shut and sneakers squeaking against polished linoleum. Madison kept her head down as she made her way to the main office, her military-trained posture giving her an air of quiet authority that most students seemed to notice and respect. Most students, but not all. Mrs. Henderson called in sick again, announced Principal Williams, a heavy-set man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He handed Madison a manila folder thick with lesson plans. "You'll be taking over her senior English class today. Room 237, second floor. Fair warning though, this particular group can be challenging." Madison nodded, accepting the folder with the same calm demeanor she'd maintained through countless briefings in her military career. She'd dealt with hostile environments before, though admittedly those had involved different kinds of threats than teenage attitudes. The elevator ride to the second floor gave her a moment to flip through the lesson plans. Shakespeare's Macbeth, a play about ambition, power, and the consequences of one's actions. Fitting, she thought, considering what she'd been through in her own life over the past year. Room 237 was at the end of a long corridor lined with motivational posters and student artwork. Madison could hear the chaos before she even reached the door. Loud voices, chairs scraping against the floor, and what sounded like someone bouncing a basketball. She paused outside the classroom, taking a deep breath and centering herself the way she'd learned during her military training. The moment she opened the door, 23 pairs of eyes turned toward her. The noise didn't stop immediately. It took a few seconds for the students to size up this new authority figure. Madison scanned the room with the same tactical awareness she'd developed overseas, quickly identifying the key players and potential trouble spots. In the back corner sat 3 students who immediately caught her attention. The first was Derek Thornton, a tall, broad-shouldered kid with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of confident smirk that suggested he'd never faced real consequences for his actions. His Letterman jacket hung over the back of his chair, and Madison could see the football team insignia, quarterback. She guessed from his build and the deference the other students showed him. Next to Derek sat his constant companion, Marcus Webb, a lanky redhead with intelligent eyes that seemed to be constantly calculating angles and opportunities. He was the type Madison recognized from her military days, the one who came up with the plans while others executed them. His expensive designer jeans and latest model smartphone suggested family money and the privilege that came with it. Third member of their trio was Tyler Brennan, shorter and stockier than his friends, with dark hair and a face that seemed to wear a permanent scowl. He had the build of a wrestler and the restless energy of someone always looking for a fight. While Derek commanded through charisma and Marcus through cunning, Tyler was clearly the enforcer of their group. Madison had encountered their type before, in every school, in every unit, in every organization she'd ever been part of. Ones who believed the rules didn't apply to them, who fed off the discomfort and fear of others, who had never learned that actions have consequences. "Good morning, class," Madison said, her voice carrying easily across the room without any need to raise it. "I'm Miss Carter, and I'll be your substitute teacher today." The general chatter died down, but she could see Derek whispering something to Marcus that made both of them snicker. Tyler was already reaching into his backpack, pulling out what looked like a small rubber ball that he began bouncing against his desk in a rhythm, clearly designed to be annoying. "Let's start by reviewing where you left off with Macbeth," Madison continued, moving to the whiteboard at the front of the room. She wrote the act and scene numbers in neat, precise handwriting, a habit from years of military documentation where clarity could mean the difference between life and death. "Oh, great, another Shakespeare lover," Derek announced loudly enough for the whole class to hear. "I bet she's gonna make us analyze every single word like it's some kind of secret code." A few students laughed nervously, unsure whether to join in or stay out of whatever was brewing. Madison had seen this dynamic countless times, the popular kids testing boundaries while the others watched to see which way the wind would blow. "Actually," Madison said, turning back to face the class with a slight smile, "Shakespeare was pretty straightforward about what he meant. Macbeth is a story about what happens when someone thinks they're above consequences. Spoiler alert, it doesn't end well for him." She let her eyes rest on Derek for just a moment longer than necessary, not long enough to be obvious, but enough to make her point clear to anyone paying attention. Marcus leaned forward in his seat, clearly intrigued by this new teacher who didn't seem intimidated by their usual routine. "So you're saying the whole play is just about karma?" "I'm saying the whole play is about choices," Madison replied, turning back to the board. "Every character makes decisions based on what they think they can get away with. The interesting part is watching what happens when reality catches up with their assumptions." For the next 45 minutes, Madison guided the class through Act 3 of Macbeth, skillfully managing the discussion while keeping one eye on the three troublemakers in the back. Derek made several more attempts to derail the conversation with sarcastic comments, but Madison deflected each one with the kind of calm professionalism that came from dealing with much more serious disruptions in her military career. Tyler's ball bouncing grew more aggressive as the period progressed, the sound echoing off the walls in a rhythm that was clearly meant to break her concentration. Madison ignored it completely, continuing her lesson as if nothing was happening. She'd learned long ago that acknowledging bad behavior often just encouraged more of it. Marcus, meanwhile, seemed to be studying her with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. He asked several genuinely thoughtful questions about the play, but Madison could sense there was something calculating behind his participation. He was gathering information, figuring out her weaknesses, preparing for something. As the bell rang and students began packing up their things, Derek stood up and stretched dramatically. "Well, that wasn't as boring as I expected," he announced to his friends. "But I bet we could make tomorrow more interesting." The three of them lingered as the rest of the class filed out, and Madison could feel their eyes on her as she erased the board and gathered her materials. She'd faced down armed insurgents and survived training that broke grown men, but there was something particularly unsettling about the malicious intent radiating from these three teenagers. "Have a good day, Miss Carter," Marcus said as they finally headed for the door, his tone perfectly polite, but somehow managing to sound like a threat. Madison nodded in acknowledgement, watching them leave while mentally preparing herself for whatever they might have planned. In her military training, they'd taught her to always expect the unexpected and to never underestimate an opponent, no matter how young or seemingly harmless they might appear. As she locked up the classroom and headed to the teacher's lounge for lunch, Madison couldn't shake the feeling that her real test at Roosevelt High School was just beginning. She'd survived war zones and military training that pushed human endurance to its limits, but dealing with teenage bullies who felt invincible might prove to be her biggest challenge yet. The afternoon would bring new lessons, new confrontations, and the beginning of a conflict that would test everything Madison had learned about courage, discipline, and the true meaning of strength. But for now, she simply walked down the empty hallway, her footsteps echoing in the silence, unaware that 3 pairs of eyes were already watching her from around the corner, planning something that would change all of their lives forever. Teachers' lounge at Roosevelt High School buzzed with the familiar chaos of lunch period. Madison found an empty table near the window and unwrapped the turkey sandwich she'd packed that morning. Around her, veteran teachers swapped stories about difficult students and upcoming parent conferences, their voices mixing with the distant sounds of teenagers in the cafeteria down the hall. "You're the new sub, right?" A woman with graying hair and kind eyes approached Madison's table. "I'm Janet Morrison. I've been teaching here for 23 years. How's your first day going?" Madison swallowed her bite of sandwich and managed a small smile. "It's been educational. Room 237 seems to have some strong personalities." Janet's expression shifted, and she glanced around before lowering her voice. "Derek Thornton's crew?" "Yeah, they've been a problem since sophomore year. Administration keeps giving them passes because Derek's dad owns half the businesses in town. And Marcus's family donates heavily to the school board." "What about the third one, Tyler?" "Tyler Brennan. His older brother was the same way before he graduated. Family's got connections with the local police force. His uncle's a sergeant. These 3 think they own the school, and honestly, most teachers just try to avoid confronting them directly." Madison nodded, filing away this information. She'd dealt with privileged troublemakers before, both in the military and in her brief civilian teaching experience. The protection these boys enjoyed from their families only made them more dangerous, not less. After lunch, Madison had a free period before her final class of the day. She used the time to walk the halls, observing the school's dynamics. Roosevelt High was typical of many schools she'd worked in, a mix of hardworking students trying to get by, overachieved kids stressed about college applications, and various social groups navigating the complex hierarchy of teenage life. But as she rounded the corner near the science wing, Madison witnessed something that made her blood run cold. Tyler Brennan had cornered a smaller freshman boy near the lockers, holding the kid's backpack just out of reach while Derek and Marcus watched with amusement. "Come on, Kevin," Tyler was saying, dangling the backpack above the freshman's head. "Just admit you're too scared to try out for any sports. Say it loud enough for everyone to hear." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The freshman, Kevin, apparently was fighting back tears of frustration and humiliation. Other students walked past, deliberately avoiding eye contact, unwilling to risk becoming targets themselves. Madison's military training kicked in, her body automatically assessing the situation. 3 against 1, emotional intimidation rather than physical violence, public setting with witnesses. The tactical part of her brain cataloged exit routes and potential escalation scenarios while her human side burned with anger at the casual cruelty she was witnessing. "Mr. Brennan," Madison's voice cut through the hallway noise like a blade. All 4 boys turned to look at her, Tyler's hand freezing mid-taunt. "I believe that belongs to Mr. Henderson." She'd guessed at the freshman's last name based on the schedule she'd seen in the office, and from Tyler's surprised expression, she'd guessed correctly. "We're just playing around, Miss Carter," Derek said smoothly, stepping forward with that politician's smile she'd already learned to distrust. "Kevin doesn't mind, do you, Kevin?" The freshman's eyes darted between Madison and the 3 upperclassmen, clearly terrified of making the wrong choice. Madison could see the calculation in his young face: agree with Derek and endure continued humiliation, or accept her help and risk worse retaliation later. "Actually, I need to speak with Kevin about his essay assignment," Madison said, creating an excuse that would give the boy a way out without losing face. "Kevin, would you grab your backpack and walk with me to my classroom?" Tyler's grip tightened on the backpack, his face flushing with anger at being challenged. For a moment, Madison thought he might escalate the situation, but Marcus placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. "Of course, Miss Carter," Marcus said with false courtesy. "We wouldn't want Kevin to miss an important academic discussion." Tyler reluctantly handed over the backpack, but not before giving Kevin a look that promised future consequences. The freshman grabbed his belongings and hurried to Madison's side, relief evident in his posture. As they walked away, Madison could hear Derek's voice behind them, low but clearly audible. "Interesting. Looks like our new teacher likes to play hero." Madison escorted Kevin to her empty classroom and closed the door behind them. The boy stood awkwardly near the front desk, still clutching his backpack like a shield. "Are you all right?" Madison asked. Gently. Kevin nodded quickly, though his hands were still shaking slightly. "Yeah, I'm fine. They do that stuff all the time. It's not a big deal." Madison recognized the defensive mechanism, minimizing the abuse to avoid acknowledging how powerless it made him feel. She'd seen the same response from young soldiers who'd been hazed by their superiors. "How long has this been going on?" "Since the beginning of the school year, maybe longer." Kevin finally looked up at her, and Madison could see the exhaustion in his 14-year-old eyes. "Look, I appreciate what you did out there, but it's just going to make things worse for me. They don't like it when teachers interfere." "What do you mean worse?" Kevin shifted uncomfortably. "Last year, Mrs. Patterson tried to help this kid named Alex who they were picking on. After that, they made Alex's life so miserable that his family ended up moving to a different district. And Mrs. Patterson, she had some kind of accident in her classroom. Slipped on something they'd spilled on the floor. Broke her wrist." Madison felt a chill run down her spine. "An accident?" "That's what the report said. But everyone knew it wasn't really an accident. Those three are smart about not leaving evidence. They know exactly how far they can push without getting in real trouble." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of the final bell. Kevin gathered his things quickly, clearly eager to escape before anyone saw him talking to Madison for too long. "Mr. Henderson," Madison called as he reached the door. "If you ever need someone to talk to, or if things get worse, please don't hesitate to find me." Kevin paused, his hand on the doorknob. "Thanks, Miss Carter, but really, the best thing you can do is just stay out of their way. They always win in the end." With that sobering assessment, Kevin slipped out of the classroom, leaving Madison alone with her thoughts. She'd encountered bullies before, but there was something particularly chilling about the systematic way these three operated. They weren't just cruel teenagers acting out, they were calculating predators who had learned to game the system. Her final class of the day was American history, with a different group of seniors, and Madison was grateful for the distraction. These students were more engaged and less hostile, allowing her to focus on teaching rather than crowd control. But even as she guided them through a discussion about World War II resistance movements, part of her mind was analyzing what she'd learned about Roosevelt. High's power structure. As the school day ended and students began filing out to catch buses or meet rides, Madison stayed behind to organize her materials for the next day. The building grew quieter, the teenage energy dissipating into the October afternoon. She was alone in her classroom when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Outside, the footsteps stopped directly outside her door, and Madison felt her military instincts sharpen. She'd learned to trust those instincts. They'd saved her life more than once overseas. Something was wrong. The door opened without a knock, and Derek Thornton stepped inside. Followed by Marcus and Tyler, they moved with the casual confidence of people who'd never faced real consequences, but Madison could see the calculation in their approach. They'd positioned themselves to block her exit route. "Miss Carter," Derek said, his voice carrying that same false politeness she'd heard earlier. "We wanted to have a word with you about this afternoon." Madison straightened in her chair, her posture unconsciously shifting into a more defensive stance. "Gentlemen, what can I do for you?" "Well," Marcus said, perching on the edge of a student desk, We wanted to make sure there weren't any misunderstandings about how things work around here. Tyler remained standing by the door, his arms crossed and his expression hostile. Unlike his friends, he seemed to have no interest in maintaining a facade of civility. Roosevelt High has its own ecosystem, Derek continued, moving closer to Madison's desk. Students like Kevin, they need to learn how to navigate social situations on their own. When teachers interfere, it actually makes things harder for everyone. Madison kept her voice level and professional. Are you suggesting I shouldn't help students who are being harassed? We're suggesting, Marcus said smoothly, that maybe you don't fully understand the dynamics at play here. Kevin needs to toughen up, learn to handle pressure. We're actually doing him a favor. The casual way they justified their cruelty reminded Madison of every abuser she'd ever encountered. The ability to reframe their actions as somehow beneficial to their victims. It was a mindset she'd seen in military contexts too, where some people used authority as an excuse for sadism. I see, Madison said carefully. And what happens to teachers who don't follow this philosophy? Tyler spoke for the first time. Since entering the room, his voice carrying an unmistakable threat. Bad things tend to happen to people who make enemies around here. Accidents, equipment failures. Sometimes people just decide Roosevelt isn't the right place for them anymore. The three boys stood there for a moment, letting their message sink in. They'd delivered their warning with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this before, and from the confidence in their posture, Madison suspected their threats had been effective in the past. Well, Derek said finally, straightening his letterman jacket, we should let you get back to your planning. Thanks for the chat, Miss Carter. We hope tomorrow goes smoothly for everyone. As quickly as they'd appeared, the three boys left the classroom, their footsteps echoing down the empty hallway. Madison sat in the sudden silence, her heart rate slowly returning to normal as her military training helped her process what had just occurred. She'd been in hostile territory before, but this felt different. In combat zones, the threats were open and honest. Here, everything was wrapped in layers of plausible deniability and institutional protection. These weren't enemy combatants. They were 17-year-old boys who'd learned that privilege. And intimidation could get them whatever they wanted. But Madison had survived 8 years in the Navy, including deployments that had tested every aspect of her physical and mental toughness. She'd faced down armed insurgents and completed training that broke grown men. 3 teenage bullies, no matter how connected or clever they thought they were, didn't scare her. What worried her was the system that had created them, and the trail of victims they'd left in their wake. Students like Kevin, teachers like Mrs. Patterson, and who knew how many others who'd simply disappeared rather than continue fighting a battle they couldn't win. As Madison finally gathered her things and prepared to leave for the day, she made a decision that would change everything. She wasn't going to be another teacher who looked the other way, another adult who chose the easy path over doing what was right. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of will between her and the 3 boys who thought they owned Roosevelt High School. But Madison Carter had been forged in crucibles far more intense than a small-town high school, and she was about to show Derek, Marcus, and Tyler what happened when privilege collided with genuine strength. Madison arrived at Roosevelt High School the next morning 30 minutes earlier than usual. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for a few faculty cars and the custodial staff's vehicles. She'd spent most of the previous evening researching the 3 boys and their families, using skills she'd developed during intelligence gathering operations in the Navy. Derek Thornton's father owned Thornton Construction, the largest building contractor in 3 counties. The family had built half the commercial properties in Millbrook and held contracts for upcoming municipal projects worth millions. Derek's mother sat on the school board and chaired the annual fundraising gala that brought in over $200,000 each year. Marcus Webb came from old money. His grandfather had founded Webb Industries, a manufacturing company that employed nearly a quarter of the town's workforce. The family's charitable foundation had funded the school's new computer lab, the renovated gymnasium, and scholarship programs that sent a dozen students to college annually. Marcus's test scores suggested he was genuinely intelligent, which made his cruelty even more calculated and dangerous. Tyler Brennan's family connections ran through law enforcement and local politics. His uncle served as police sergeant, his cousin worked as a deputy sheriff, and his father held a position in the county prosecutor's office. It was a network that could make problems disappear or evidence get misplaced when necessary. Armed with this knowledge, Madison understood exactly what she was facing. These weren't just privileged teenagers acting out. They were the next generation of a power structure that had been protecting itself for decades. No wonder previous teachers had chosen to look the other way or simply leave. But Madison had fought battles against much worse odds. She'd operated in environments where making the wrong choice meant death, not just professional inconvenience. The stakes here were different, but her training remained the same. Gather intelligence, assess the threat, plan multiple contingencies, and never back down from a mission that mattered. She used her early arrival time to walk the school's perimeter, noting security camera locations, emergency exits, and areas with limited visibility. Old habits from overseas deployments died hard, and situational awareness had become second nature. The school's layout was typical: long corridors with multiple blind spots, stairwells that could become bottlenecks, and plenty of places where confrontations could occur away from witnesses. At 7:45 a.m., students began arriving in earnest. Madison positioned herself near the main entrance, observing interaction patterns and social dynamics. She watched Derek hold court near the trophy case, surrounded by teammates and admirers. Marcus moved through different groups like a social chameleon, equally comfortable with academic achievers and rebellious underclassmen. Tyler prowled the edges, always scanning for weakness or opportunity. The warning bell rang, and Madison made her way to room 237. Today's lesson plan focused on Lady Macbeth's manipulation tactics, another piece of literary irony that wasn't lost on her given recent events. She'd prepared additional materials that explored how people use psychological pressure to control others, thinking it might resonate with students who'd experienced bullying firsthand. The class filed in with the usual mix of energy and reluctance. Madison noticed that Kevin Henderson wasn't among them, though he should have been according to the roster. She made a mental note to check on his absence later. Derek, Marcus, and Tyler took their usual seats in the back corner, but their demeanor had shifted overnight. Where yesterday they'd been testing boundaries and gauging her responses, today they carried themselves with the confidence of people who believed they'd already won. Derek's smirk was more pronounced, Marcus's calculating stare more intense, and Tyler's restless energy had focused into something that felt genuinely menacing. "Good morning, class," Madison began, writing the day's objectives on the whiteboard. "Today we're examining how Lady Macbeth uses psychological manipulation to achieve her goals." "Manipulation," Derek repeated loudly, as if tasting the word. "That's an interesting topic choice, Miss Carter. Very relevant." Madison continued writing, not acknowledging the comment directly. She'd learned that responding to every provocation only encouraged escalation. Instead, she'd wait for them to overplay their hand. "Can anyone give me an example of manipulation from yesterday's reading?" she asked, turning back to face the class. Several hands went up, but Tyler's voice cut through before anyone could be called on. "What about when someone pretends to care about helping people, but they're really just trying to cause trouble?" A few students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The subtext was clear to everyone in the room, but Tyler had phrased it as a legitimate literary interpretation, making it difficult for Madison to address directly without seeming defensive. "That's an interesting perspective, Mr. Brennan," Madison replied evenly. Can you find a specific passage that supports that interpretation? Tyler's face flushed with anger at being challenged to back up his veiled accusation with actual textual evidence. Marcus quickly intervened, opening his book and pointing to a passage. Act 1, Scene 7, Marcus read aloud. Lady Macbeth questions Macbeth's courage and manhood to push him toward murder. She's using emotional manipulation disguised as concern for his reputation. It was a perfectly valid analysis, delivered with the kind of academic sophistication that made it impossible to criticize. But Madison could hear the layer of meaning beneath the words. They were describing her intervention yesterday as a form of manipulation, painting themselves as the real victims. The class continued with this undercurrent of tension. Every literary discussion became a chess match, with the three boys finding ways to insert barbed comments that seemed academic on the surface, but carried personal attacks underneath. Other students began to notice, some looking uncomfortable while others watched with the fascination of people witnessing a slow-motion collision. About halfway through the period, Derek raised his hand with exaggerated politeness. Miss Carter, I'm curious about your background. Have you always been interested in teaching? The question seemed innocent enough, but Madison recognized it as intelligence gathering. They were fishing for information they could use against her, trying to understand her vulnerabilities and past experiences. I've had various careers before education, Madison replied carefully. Experience in different fields often provides valuable perspectives for teaching. What kind of experience? Marcus pressed, leaning forward with apparent interest. Military, corporate, law enforcement? Madison felt a chill of recognition. They were probing specifically, not randomly. Had they already done research on her? Background? Did they know about her Navy service? I prefer to keep the focus on literature rather than personal history, Madison said, redirecting the conversation back to Macbeth. But she could see the satisfied expressions on their faces, as if her deflection had confirmed something they'd already suspected. The rest of the class period passed without major incident, but Madison could feel the three boys studying her with new intensity. As students filed out for their next period, Tyler deliberately bumped into her desk, sending her coffee mug sliding toward the edge. Madison caught it smoothly, a reflexive action that demonstrated the kind of hand-eye coordination that came from military training. Tyler's eyes narrowed as he processed this small revelation. Then he smiled with genuine malice before following his friends out of the classroom. During her lunch break, Madison decided to check on Kevin Henderson's absence. She found his guidance counselor, Mrs. Rodriguez, in her office grading papers. Kevin called in sick today, Mrs. Rodriguez explained, but her expression suggested she didn't entirely believe the excuse. His mother said he had a stomach bug. Though between you and me, Kevin's had an unusual number of stomach bugs this semester. Has anyone spoken to his family about potential bullying issues? Mrs. Rodriguez sighed, setting down her pen. His parents have been contacted multiple times over the years. They're good people, but they feel overwhelmed. Kevin's father works 2 jobs to make ends meet, and his mother is dealing with her own health issues. They want to help, but they don't have the resources to fight the kind of families that usually cause problems here. What do you mean? Let's just say that when certain students are involved in incidents, those incidents tend to disappear from official records. Parents get called into meetings where they're told their children are misunderstanding social dynamics or being overly sensitive. Eventually, most families decide it's easier to keep their heads down and hope their kids can just survive. Until graduation. Madison felt her anger building, but she kept her voice controlled. And the administration supports this approach. Mrs. Rodriguez looked around her office nervously, as if checking for listening devices. Principal Williams is a good man, but he's got a mortgage, kids in college, and 23 years toward his pension. The school board makes it very clear what kinds of problems they want to hear about and what kinds they don't. What about documentation? Incident reports, witness statements. There's always documentation, Mrs. Rodriguez said bitterly. Perfectly crafted reports that describe mutual disagreements and social conflicts that don't mention specific threats or systematic harassment. Everyone covers their legal obligations without actually addressing the real issues. Madison left the guidance office with a clearer picture of the institutional corruption she was facing. It wasn't just 3 bullies. It was an entire system designed to protect them and silence their victims. Teachers, administrators, and even parents had been conditioned to accept this toxic dynamic as unchangeable reality. But Madison had experience with corrupt systems. In some of her overseas deployments, she'd encountered local power structures built on intimidation and mutual protection. The key to dismantling such systems was finding their pressure points and applying leverage. In ways they didn't expect. Her afternoon classes passed uneventfully, but Madison could sense something building. During her final period, she noticed unusual activity in the hallway outside her classroom. Students kept walking past her door more frequently than normal, and several times she caught glimpses of Derek, Marcus, or Tyler among them. They were planning something. Madison could feel it in the way conversations stopped when she appeared, the way certain students avoided eye contact, the subtle charge of anticipation that filled the air before a storm. As the final bell rang and students began their exodus, Madison prepared herself for whatever confrontation was coming. She'd faced roadside bombs, sniper fire, and hand-to-hand combat with trained enemies. 3 entitled teenagers, no matter how clever or connected they thought they were, didn't worry her. What worried her was the knowledge that this wasn't really about her. It was about every Kevin Henderson who'd been systematically broken down by these predators, every teacher who'd been driven away, every parent who'd been forced to accept their child's suffering as the price of living in this community. Hallways grew quiet as buses loaded and cars pulled away from the pickup circle. Madison finished organizing her materials and prepared to leave, knowing that tomorrow would likely bring the real test of will she'd been anticipating since her first day at Roosevelt High School. But as she reached for her jacket, Madison heard something that made her freeze, the sound of multiple footsteps moving through the building with deliberate purpose, heading directly toward her classroom. It was too early for custodial staff, too late for legitimate student activities. Madison's military training kicked into high gear as she assessed her situation. 3 hostile actors with unknown capabilities, limited escape routes, no backup, and institutional protection that would likely shield them from consequences no matter what they did to her. The footsteps grew closer, and Madison Carter prepared to face whatever Derek Thornton, Marcus Webb, and Tyler Brennan had planned for her. The footsteps stopped just outside Madison's classroom door. She could hear whispered voices, 3 distinct tones coordinating something in hushed, urgent syllables. Madison moved away from her desk, positioning herself where she'd have multiple exit options while maintaining visual contact with the entrance. Her breathing slowed automatically, heart rate dropping into the controlled rhythm she'd learned during combat training. The door opened, but instead of Derek, Marcus, and Tyler, a janitor named Pete wheeled in a large gray bucket and MOP. He was an older man with calloused hands and kind eyes who'd always nodded politely when their paths crossed in the hallways. "Sorry to bother you, Miss Carter," Pete said, his voice carrying an odd tension. "Got a report of a spill in here that needs cleaning before tomorrow." Madison scanned the floor of her immaculate classroom. "I don't see any spill, Mr. Peterson." Pete's eyes darted toward the doorway, then back to Madison with an expression she recognized from her military days, the look of someone being coerced against their better judgment. "They said ... they said it was by the window. Might need to move some furniture around to get to it properly." The pieces clicked into place. The 3 boys weren't coming for a direct confrontation. They were using Pete as an unwitting accomplice in whatever they had planned. Madison's tactical assessment shifted immediately. Pete wasn't a threat. He was another victim being manipulated by the same system that protected Derek, Marcus, and Tyler. "Mr. Peterson," Madison said gently, "who exactly told you about this?" "Spill?" Before Pete could answer, Derek Thornton appeared in the doorway carrying a large container that looked like it belonged in the school's kitchen. Behind him came Marcus with what appeared to be an industrial-sized bag of ice, and Tyler brought up the rear with a conspiratorial grin that made Madison's blood run cold. "Hey, Pete," Derek said with false cheerfulness, "we brought the extra cleaning supplies you needed. This should be perfect for that big spill Miss Carter made." Pete looked confused, glancing between the boys and Madison. "I didn't ask for any." "Sure you did," Marcus interrupted smoothly, setting down the bag of ice. "You said you needed help with the water damage from the broken pipe. We're just being helpful students." Madison watched this manipulation with growing anger. They were involving an innocent man in their scheme, using his position and reputation to provide cover for whatever they were planning. It was exactly the kind of calculated cruelty she'd come to expect from them, but seeing it in action made her stomach turn. "There's no broken pipe," Madison said firmly. "And no water damage. Mr. Peterson, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding." Tyler stepped forward, his bulk blocking Pete's view of the doorway. "Come on, Pete, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Just do your job and clean up the mess." The threat in Tyler's voice was unmistakable, and Pete's face went pale. Madison realized that these boys had probably been terrorizing the custodial staff for years, using their family connections to ensure that any complaints disappeared into administrative black holes. "Actually," Madison said, her voice taking on the command authority she'd used with subordinates in the Navy. "Mr. Peterson, I need you to contact Principal Williams immediately. Tell him we have a situation in room 237 that requires his immediate attention." Derek laughed, a sound devoid of any genuine humor. "Oh, Miss Carter, I don't think you understand how this works. Principal Williams is in a very important budget meeting with my mother and Marcus's father. They're discussing the new wing that's going to be built with their generous donations. I doubt he'll want to be interrupted for a simple cleaning issue." The casual way Derek revealed his family's influence over the school administration confirmed Madison's worst suspicions about the corruption at Roosevelt High, but it also revealed something else. They'd planned this carefully, ensuring that potential sources of adult intervention would be unavailable when they needed them to be. Marcus opened the bag of ice, the frozen cubes clattering against each other with a sound that somehow felt ominous in the quiet classroom. "You know, Miss Carter, we've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, about how teachers sometimes don't understand the social dynamics at play here. We decided to provide you with a more immersive educational experience," Tyler added, moving to block the door more completely. "Something that might help you appreciate how things really work around here." Madison assessed her tactical situation with cold precision. 3 hostile actors, 1 innocent bystander, limited escape routes, and weapons of opportunity disguised as cleaning supplies. She'd been in worse situations, but rarely in circumstances where her response would be so heavily scrutinized by civilian authorities afterward. "Gentlemen," Madison said, her voice remaining perfectly calm, "I think you should reconsider whatever you're planning. Actions have consequences, and not all consequences can be covered up by family connections." Derek's smile widened, and Madison caught a glimpse of the true predator beneath his polished exterior. "See, that's where you're wrong. My family has been covering up consequences in this town for 3 generations. Marcus's family practically owns the local police force through their charitable contributions. And Tyler's uncle will write up whatever report we need him to write. Plus," Marcus added with academic precision, "we're minors. Even if something did go wrong, which it won't, we'd face juvenile consequences at most. Probably just community service which we can fulfill by volunteering at our family's charitable foundations." Madison realized they'd had this conversation before, probably multiple times with different victims. They'd systematically analyzed every aspect of their protection and concluded they were essentially untouchable. It was the kind of thorough planning that made them genuinely dangerous, because they'd removed fear of consequences from their decision-making process. Pete looked increasingly uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot while glancing between Madison and the three boys. "Look, I don't know what's going on here, but I've got other rooms to clean. Maybe I should just come back later." "Actually, Pete," Tyler said, placing a heavy hand on the janitor's shoulder, "we really need you to stay. This is important school business, and we need an adult witness to make sure everything is handled properly." Madison understood the implication immediately. They wanted Pete present so they could claim their actions were witnessed by a school employee, providing legitimacy to whatever version of events they planned to report afterward. It was another layer of their systematic approach to avoiding accountability. Derek began unscrewing the lid of the large container he'd brought, and Madison caught the unmistakable smell of industrial cleaning solution mixed with something else. Something that made her eyes water slightly. They'd prepared more than just ice water. They'd created a mixture designed to be genuinely unpleasant or potentially harmful. "You know what your problem is, Miss Carter?" Derek asked conversationally, while Tyler and Marcus positioned themselves on either side of her. "You think you're still in whatever military unit you served in. But this isn't Afghanistan or Iraq or wherever you think you're so tough. This is Roosevelt High School, and here we make the rules." Madison's blood went cold. They'd definitely researched her background, probably using their family's connections to access records that should have been confidential. The casual way Derek revealed this knowledge was meant to demonstrate just how far their reach extended. "The thing about military training," Marcus added with false academic interest, "is that it teaches people to follow chains of command and respect authority. But what happens when the authority structure doesn't work the way you expect? When the people in charge are actually on our side?" Madison remained silent, calculating distances and angles while they revealed the full scope of their planning. They'd researched her background, neutralized potential adult intervention, involved an innocent witness, and prepared what appeared to be a chemical mixture designed to cause harm while maintaining plausible deniability. Tyler hefted the bag of ice, testing its weight like a weapon. "We talked to some people who know about your service record. Apparently you had some problems with authority toward the end. Conflicts with superior officers. A pattern of insubordination that led to your early discharge." Madison felt a surge of rage at the violation of her privacy, but she kept her expression neutral. Whatever they'd learned about her military service, they were using it to paint a picture of someone with a history of poor judgment and conflict with authority. It was a character assassination designed to undermine her credibility before their confrontation even began. "So here's what's going to happen," Derek said, lifting the container of chemical-laced water. "You're going to receive a practical lesson in how Roosevelt High School really operates. And afterward, you're going to understand why it's better for everyone if you just do your job and stay out of things that don't concern you." Pete looked horrified as he finally understood what was about to happen. "Boys, this isn't right. You can't just—" "Pete," Marcus said sharply, "remember who signs your paychecks. Remember who decides whether the custodial staff gets their contracts renewed next year. Remember whose families control the school board that determines your pension benefits." The threat was delivered with the casual brutality of someone who'd never faced real consequences for their actions. Pete's face crumpled with the recognition that speaking up would cost him everything he'd worked for over decades of service. Madison watched this final manipulation with crystalline clarity. They weren't just planning to humiliate her. They were systematically destroying every possible source of help or protection, demonstrating their absolute control over every aspect of the school environment. But what Derek, Marcus, And Tyler didn't understand was that Madison Carter had been forged in environments where systematic corruption and abuse of power were daily realities. She'd learned how to fight back against systems designed to protect the powerful and silence the weak. And most importantly, she'd learned that sometimes the only way to stop a predator was to show them what real strength looked like. As Derek raised the container and Tyler positioned the ice bag for maximum impact, Madison Carter prepared to teach 3 entitled bullies the difference between privilege and actual power. The lesson was about to begin, but not in the way they expected. The moment Derek lifted the container, Madison's world shifted into the hyper-focused state she'd experienced during combat operations. Time seemed to slow as her mind processed multiple variables simultaneously. Derek's positioning, the trajectory of the coming attack, Tyler's grip on the ice bag, Marcus's flanking position, Pete's location near the exit, escape routes, potential weapons, and the chemical composition of whatever Derek was about to dump on her. "Last chance, Miss Carter," Derek said, savoring what he believed was his moment of absolute victory. "Apologize for interfering yesterday. Promise to stay out of our business. And maybe we'll reconsider this educational demonstration." Madison's response was delivered in the same calm tone she'd used to brief missions in hostile territory. "Mr. Thornton, you have approximately 3 seconds to put that container down and walk away. This is your only warning." Tyler burst into laughter. Did she just threaten us? A substitute teacher just threatened us? He looked at his friends with genuine amazement. "This is even better than I thought it would be." Marcus tilted his head with academic curiosity. "Fascinating. Even facing overwhelming odds, she maintains the delusion that she has some kind of authority here. It's almost admirable in its complete disconnect from reality." Derek raised the container higher, positioning it for maximum coverage. "You know what, Miss Carter? I think we're going to enjoy showing you exactly how much authority you really have in this school." The container tipped forward, and Madison moved. 8 years of military training compressed into a single fluid motion that transformed her from victim to operator in the space of a heartbeat. She dropped into a combat crouch as the chemical laced. Water arced over her head, simultaneously launching herself forward in a direction none of the 3 boys had anticipated. Instead of backing away or trying to dodge defensively, Madison attacked. Her shoulder drove into Derek's midsection with the precision of someone trained in close-quarters combat, lifting him completely off his feet and sending him crashing into the whiteboard behind him. The container flew from his hands, spraying its contents across the ceiling and walls instead of its intended target. Tyler reacted first, swinging the bag of ice like a club toward Madison's head. But Madison had fought opponents who'd actually been trying to kill her, and Tyler's telegraph-heavy attack seemed to move in slow motion. She ducked under the swing, grabbed Tyler's extended arm, and used his own momentum to send him spinning into a cluster of desks that collapsed under his bulk with a tremendous crash. Marcus, the strategist of the group, tried to retreat toward the door where he could call for backup or escape to regroup. But Madison had learned never to leave an enemy at your back. She intercepted him with a movement that was part tackle, part controlled fall, taking both of them to the ground in a tangle of limbs. The entire confrontation lasted less than 10 seconds. Derek lay groaning against the whiteboard, the wind knocked out of him and his letterman jacket torn. Tyler was struggling to extract himself from the wreckage of overturned desks, his face flushed with exertion and growing panic. Marcus found himself pinned beneath Madison with her forearm across his throat. Not enough pressure to cause damage, but more than enough to make breathing difficult and escape impossible. Pete stood frozen by the door, his maintenance bucket forgotten, staring at the scene with an expression of complete shock. The 3 most feared students in Roosevelt High School had just been systematically dismantled by a substitute teacher who hadn't even raised her voice. "Gentlemen," Madison said, her breathing barely elevated despite the physical exertion, "let Me clarify something about military training. It doesn't teach you to follow orders blindly. It teaches you to complete missions regardless of obstacles. And my mission here is to ensure that students can attend school without being terrorized by cowards who hide behind their parents' money. Derek struggled to sit up, his face pale and his usual confident smirk replaced by something Madison had never seen from him before. Genuine fear. You can't do this. Do you have any idea who our families are? What will they do to you? Madison applied slightly more pressure to Marcus's throat, causing him to make a choking sound that got the attention of his two friends. Let me tell you what's going to happen next. You're going to listen very carefully, because your futures depend on understanding what I'm about to explain. Tyler finally managed to stand up, but instead of advancing, he backed away until he hit the wall. His earlier bravado had evaporated completely, replaced by the kind of terror that came from realizing he'd fundamentally misjudged an opponent. First, Madison continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to life and death decision-making. You're going to apologize to Mr. Peterson for involving him in your pathetic attempt at intimidation. A man who's worked honestly for decades shouldn't be threatened by children who've never earned anything in their lives. Second, you're going to personally apologize to Kevin Henderson and every other student you've tormented over the years. Not just Kevin, every victim whose name I can find, and I guarantee I'll find them all. Marcus tried to speak, but Madison's forearm made verbal communication impossible. She eased the pressure slightly, allowing him to gasp for air. Third, Madison said, you're going to donate your own money, not your parents' money. Your own allowances and job earnings, too. Anti-bullying programs at this school and others in the district. I want to see receipts proving where every dollar went. Derek struggled to his feet, using the whiteboard for support. His voice cracked when he spoke. You're insane if you think we'll do any of that. Our families will have you arrested for assault. We'll claim you attacked us without provocation. Madison smiled for the first time since the confrontation began, and it was not a pleasant expression. Mr. Thornton, let me introduce you to some facts about evidence and documentation that your privileged upbringing apparently failed to teach you. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small device that had been recording the entire encounter. Every word of your threats, every detail of your planning, every admission of your family's corruption, all captured in high definition. Audio and video, including your confession about researching my military background illegally. The color drained from Derek's face as he realized the implications. Marcus stopped struggling beneath Madison's hold, his strategic mind quickly calculating the catastrophic legal and social consequences of everything they'd said being made public. But wait, Madison continued. There's more. Mr. Peterson here witnessed your systematic intimidation of school staff. The chemical analysis of whatever you mixed with that water will show intent to cause harm. And the coordination of this attack while neutralizing adult supervision demonstrates premeditation. Tyler slumped against the wall, his legs apparently no longer able to support his weight. This isn't how this was supposed to go, he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. No, Madison agreed, it's not. You thought you were attacking a helpless substitute teacher who would quietly disappear rather than cause trouble for your powerful families. Instead, you attacked someone trained to fight back against people exactly like you. She stood up, releasing Marcus, who immediately rolled away and scrambled to join his friends against the far wall. All three boys huddled together with the desperate solidarity of people who just realized their world had fundamentally changed. Here's what's actually going to happen, Madison said, straightening her clothes and checking her recording device. You have 24 hours to begin implementing everything I just outlined. Apologies, donations, and a complete cessation of bullying behavior throughout this school. And if we don't? Derek asked, though his voice suggested he already knew. The answer Madison held up the recording device. "Then this goes to the school board, the police, the local media, and every social media platform I can find. Your family's reputations, built over generations, become nationally known examples of privilege protecting predators. College admissions committees see exactly what kind of people you really are. Future employers discover that hiring you means associating with systematic abuse." The three boys exchanged glances that confirmed Madison's assessment was accurate. They understood the consequences when those consequences finally carried real weight. "But," Madison continued, "if you demonstrate genuine change, real apologies, meaningful donations, and permanent behavioral improvement, then this recording stays private. You get a chance to become better people instead of just becoming cautionary tales." Pete stepped forward, his voice shaky but determined. "Miss Carter, I want to thank you. These boys have been making my job miserable for years, and I never thought anyone would stand up to them." Madison nodded to him respectfully. "Mr. Peterson, you shouldn't have to endure workplace harassment from students any more than teachers should have to accept it. Everyone deserves to work in an environment free from intimidation." Derek straightened up, trying to recover some semblance of his former confidence. "This isn't over. You think one recording changes everything, but you don't understand how deep our family's connections go." "We'll find ways to Mr. Thornton," Madison interrupted. "Let me explain something about military intelligence operations. This recording isn't my only insurance policy. I've documented every aspect of the systematic corruption at this school, including detailed records of every victim your group has targeted and every incident your families have covered up." She paused, letting that information sink in before delivering the final blow. "I've also forwarded copies of everything to contacts in federal law enforcement who specialize in investigating institutional corruption and civil rights violations. People who aren't impressed by local political connections." The silence that followed was absolute. Madison had just revealed that their protective bubble extended only as far as local influence, and she'd brought federal oversight into their small-town kingdom. Marcus, the strategist, was the first to understand the full implications. "You're saying we don't actually have a choice?" "Mr. Webb," Madison replied, "you've always had choices. You chose to be predators instead of protectors. You chose cruelty over kindness. You chose to use privilege as a weapon instead of a responsibility. Today, you finally get to make a different choice." As the three boys slowly filed out of the classroom, their usual swagger replaced by the shuffling gait of people whose world had just collapsed, Madison Carter knew that Roosevelt High School would never be the same. The reign of terror that had lasted for years was finally over, ended not by administrative intervention or parental responsibility, but by someone who understood that sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to show them what real strength looks like. The news of what had happened in room 237 spread through Roosevelt High School like wildfire. By the next morning, whispered conversations filled the hallways as students tried to piece together fragments of the story. Madison Carter had arrived early again, but this time she wasn't alone. Principal Williams waited in her classroom, along with two men in expensive suits who introduced themselves as attorneys for the Thornton and Webb families. "Miss Carter," Principal Williams began, his voice strained with the weight of political pressure, "we need to discuss yesterday's incident. There are serious allegations being made about your conduct with students." Madison set down her coffee and faced the three men with the same calm composure she'd maintained throughout her military career. "I assume you're referring to the incident where three students attempted to assault me with a chemical mixture while threatening a member of your custodial staff?" The older attorney, representing the Thornton family, stepped forward with rehearsed authority. "Ms. Carter, my clients contend that you initiated violence against minors who were merely attempting to help with classroom maintenance. We have witness testimony that you attacked these boys without provocation." "Interesting," Madison replied, pulling out her recording device and setting it on her desk. Because I have audio and video documentation of the entire encounter, including their explicit threats, their admission of systematic harassment of school staff, and their detailed confession about using family connections to avoid consequences for criminal behavior. The second attorney, younger and representing the Webb family, exchanged glances with his colleague. Recordings made without consent may not be admissible in legal proceedings. Ms. Carter, more importantly, these are minors we're discussing, and their families have significant concerns about their treatment. Madison connected her device to the classroom's smart board, filling the screen with a clear timestamp and high-definition video. Pennsylvania is a one-party consent state for recordings, counselors. But more importantly, this isn't a courtroom. It's a school where students and staff have been systematically terrorized for years while the administration looked the other way. Principal Williams shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Miss Carter, I understand your frustration, but we need to consider the broader implications here. These families have been generous supporters of our school district for decades. Surely we can find a solution that works for everyone. Principal Williams, Madison said, her voice taking on the edge of command authority. Let me clarify the situation for you. Your generous supporters have been operating a protection racket that would make organized crime families proud. They've corrupted every level of oversight, silenced victims through intimidation, and created an environment where violence and harassment are acceptable as long as the perpetrators come from the right families. She pressed play on the recording, and Derek's voice filled the room. My family has been covering up consequences in this town for 3 generations. Marcus's family practically owns the local police force through their charitable contributions. The attorney's expressions shifted as they realized the full scope of what had been captured. These weren't just accusations of teenage misbehavior. This was documented evidence of systemic corruption involving their clients' families. Furthermore, Madison continued, I've been in contact with the FBI's Civil Rights Division regarding patterns of institutional discrimination and corruption in this school district. They're very interested in how certain families have been able to essentially purchase immunity from consequences for their children's criminal behavior. Principal Williams went pale. The FBI, Ms. Carter, surely that's an overreaction. We can handle this internally through proper channels. Madison smiled grimly. Principal Williams, the proper channels are exactly what's been corrupted. When guidance counselors are afraid to document incidents, when police reports disappear, when school board members receive instructions about which complaints to ignore, those aren't proper channels anymore. They're instruments of oppression. The older attorney cleared his throat, his demeanor becoming more conciliatory. Ms. Carter, perhaps we can discuss a reasonable settlement. My clients are prepared to make a substantial donation to the school's anti-bullying programs in exchange for your discretion regarding this matter. Counselor, Madison replied, your client's money is exactly what created this problem in the first place. Their substantial donations have been buying silence and complicity for years. I'm not interested in perpetuating that system. At that moment, there was a knock on the classroom door. Kevin Henderson entered hesitantly, followed by Pete Peterson, and 2 other adults Madison didn't recognize. Miss Carter, Kevin said, his voice stronger than she'd ever heard it. These are my parents. They wanted to thank you personally. Kevin's father, a man with calloused hands and tired eyes, stepped forward. Ms. Carter, Kevin told us what you did yesterday. We've been trying to get help for our son for 3 years, and every time we complained, we were told there wasn't enough evidence or that Kevin was being too sensitive. They made us feel like we were the problem, Kevin's mother added, her voice shaking with years of suppressed anger. Like we were somehow failing our son by not teaching him to toughen up and accept being terrorized. Pete stepped forward, surprising everyone in the room. Principal Williams, I want to file an official complaint about workplace harassment. For years, I've been threatened and intimidated by these students, and every time I tried to report it, I was told to work it out or that it was just boys being boys. Principal Williams looked like a man watching his career crumble in real time. Pete, I'm sure we can address any concerns you have through the proper. No. Pete interrupted, his voice carrying decades of suppressed frustration. The proper channels are exactly what Miss Carter said. They're broken. I'm 62 years old, and I shouldn't have to be afraid to do my job because 3 kids know their families will protect them no matter what they do. The younger attorney tried to regain control of the situation. These are serious accusations that require careful legal review. We strongly advise against making statements that could be considered defamatory. Counselor, Kevin's father interrupted. Are you threatening us now too? Because that's exactly what these families have been doing for years, using their lawyers and their money to silence anyone who tries to speak up. Madison watched this confrontation with deep satisfaction. The victims were finally finding their voices, and the system that had protected their abusers was beginning to crack under the weight of collective resistance. Her phone buzzed with a text. Message from an unknown number. Miss Carter, this is Derek. We need to talk. Can we meet after school, DT? Madison showed the message to the room. It appears Mr. Thornton wants to discuss something. Should I tell him our conversation needs to include his attorney? The older attorney nodded grimly. Under the circumstances, yes, any communication with my client should go through legal representation. Actually, Madison said, I think this conversation should include everyone who's been affected by this situation. The victims deserve to hear whatever Mr. Thornton has to say. That afternoon, room 237 became the site of an unprecedented gathering. Derek, Marcus, and Tyler sat in the front row, flanked by their attorneys and their parents, powerful people, who suddenly looked very small and uncertain. Behind them sat Kevin and his parents, Pete Peterson, Mrs. Rodriguez, the guidance counselor, and several other students who had finally found the courage to speak about their experiences. Derek stood up slowly, his usual confidence replaced by something Madison had never seen from him before: genuine remorse. I want to apologize, he began, his voice cracking slightly. Not because my lawyer told me to, but because Miss Carter showed me what I really was. He turned to face Kevin directly. Kevin, I'm sorry for making your life hell. I'm sorry for making you afraid to come to school. I'm sorry for making you feel like you didn't matter. Marcus stood next, his analytical mind having processed the full implications of their new reality. I want to apologize too, but more than that, I want to understand how we became the kind of people who thought this was acceptable. I think we need professional help to figure out how to be better. Tyler remained seated, struggling with emotions he clearly wasn't equipped to handle. Finally, he looked up at Pete Peterson. Mr. Peterson, I'm sorry I made work suck for you. My dad always said people like you should be grateful to have jobs, but that's not true. You deserve respect, and I never gave you any. The apologies continued for nearly an hour, with each of the 3 boys acknowledging specific incidents and victims. But Madison could see that something deeper was happening. The entire power structure of Roosevelt High School was being dismantled and rebuilt in real time. Derek's father, the powerful contractor, stood up with visible difficulty. Miss Carter, my son has told me things about our family's behavior that make me deeply ashamed. We've used our influence to protect him from consequences, and in doing so, we created a monster. Marcus's mother, the school board member, wiped tears from her eyes. We thought we were protecting our children by shielding them from accountability. Instead, we taught them that power means never having to face the results of their actions. Tyler's uncle, the police sergeant, looked like a man confronting his own corruption for the first time. I've buried reports and lost evidence because these were good families and good kids who just made mistakes. But there's a difference between mistakes and patterns of predatory behavior. As the sun set outside room 237, Madison realized that something extraordinary had happened. A small group of victims had found their voices. A corrupt system had been exposed and challenged, and 3 young predators had been forced to confront the reality of their actions. But most importantly, Roosevelt High School would never again be a place where privilege could purchase immunity from consequences. The reign of terror was over, and a new chapter was beginning, one built on accountability, respect, and the understanding that true strength comes from protecting the vulnerable, not exploiting them. The transformation was just beginning. But Madison Carter had accomplished her mission. She'd shown an entire community what happened when someone refused to be intimidated by corrupt power, and she'd given victims the courage to reclaim their voices and their dignity. 6 months later, Roosevelt High School barely resembled the institution Madison Carter had first encountered. The transformation had been swift, comprehensive, and irreversible. What began as one substitute teacher's refusal to accept the unacceptable had sparked a complete overhaul of the school's culture, administration, and community relationships. Madison walked through hallways that now buzzed with genuine learning energy rather than predatory tension. Students moved freely without checking over their shoulders, engaged in conversations without fear of being overheard by the wrong people, and participated in activities based on interest rather than social survival strategies, the most visible. Change was the Roosevelt High Anti-Bullying Center, housed in what had previously been unused administrative space. Funded entirely by donations from Derek, Marcus, and Tyler, money they'd earned through part-time jobs rather than family allowances, the center provided counseling, conflict resolution, and peer mediation services to students throughout the district. Kevin Henderson had become the center's first student coordinator, his transformation from victim to advocate inspiring others who'd suffered in silence. The quiet freshman who'd once cowered in hallways now spoke confidently at school board meetings and anti-bullying conferences across the state. "Ms. Carter," Kevin called out as he approached her between classes, carrying a clipboard and wearing the kind of smile that reaches all the way to someone's eyes. The peer mediation session this afternoon was incredible. We helped resolve a conflict between 2 sophomore groups before it escalated into anything serious. Madison smiled, remembering the terrified boy she'd first encountered being tormented near the lockers. "That's excellent work, Kevin. How are Derek, Marcus, and Tyler doing with their community service hours?" "Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about," Kevin said, his expression becoming more serious. "They've completed their required hours, but they asked if they could continue volunteering. Derek wants to start a program where former bullies mentor current students who are struggling with anger and power issues." The irony wasn't lost on Madison. The 3 boys who'd once terrorized Roosevelt High were now dedicating their free time to preventing others from following their path. It was exactly the kind of transformation she'd hoped for, but hadn't dared to expect. Principal Williams approached them, and Madison noted how much more relaxed he appeared these days. The constant pressure of managing family politics and covering up incidents had been replaced by the straightforward challenge of running an educational institution focused on actual education. "Ms. Carter," he said, "I wanted to personally thank you again for everything you've done here. The school board voted last night to offer you a permanent position teaching American history and coordinating our new conflict resolution program." Madison considered the offer carefully. 6 months ago, she'd been a drifting substitute teacher, moving between schools without finding a place where she felt she could make a real difference. Now she had the opportunity to build something lasting. "I'd be honored to accept," she said, and Kevin's face lit up with genuine joy. "There's something else," Principal Williams continued. "The State Education Department has asked Roosevelt High to serve as a model program for addressing institutional bullying. We're going to be hosting administrators and teachers from across Pennsylvania who want to implement similar reforms." Madison nodded, understanding the broader implications. Roosevelt High's transformation had attracted attention far beyond Millbrook, proving that even deeply entrenched systems of abuse and corruption could be dismantled and rebuilt when people found the courage to demand better. After Kevin and Principal Williams left to prepare for the afternoon's activities, Madison made her way to room 237 for her final class of the day. But as she approached the door, she found Derek Thornton waiting outside, looking nervous in a way that reminded her of their first encounter. "Miss Carter," Derek said, "could I talk to you for a minute before class starts?" Madison gestured for him to follow her into the classroom, noting how different the space felt now. The walls displayed student artwork celebrating diversity and kindness, conflict resolution strategies, and photos from community service projects. The atmosphere of fear and tension had been replaced by one of learning and growth. "What's on your mind, Mr. Thornton?" Derek sat down in one of the front row seats, a stark contrast to his old position in the back corner. "I got my acceptance letter from Penn State yesterday. Full academic scholarship based on my essay about transformation and accountability." Madison felt a surge of pride, remembering the calculating predator who'd once threatened her with impunity. "That's wonderful news, Derek. You've worked incredibly hard to earn that opportunity." "The thing is," Derek continued, "I almost didn't apply. I figured no college would want someone with my history, even after everything we've done to make amends. But my essay was about meeting you, about learning the difference between real strength and the fake power I thought I had." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I wrote about how you showed me that protecting people is more powerful than hurting them, that earning respect is more valuable than demanding fear, and that real consequences teach lessons that privilege never can." Madison leaned against her desk, moved by the sincerity in Derek's voice. "What will you study at Penn State?" "Criminal justice with a focus on institutional reform," Derek replied. "I want to work on changing systems that protect people like I used to be. Maybe join the FBI's Civil Rights Division someday, like the agents you contacted." The irony was profound. The boy who'd once benefited from systematic corruption now wanted to dedicate his life to fighting it. Madison realized that sometimes the most effective reformers were those who'd experienced the damage that corrupt systems could cause from the inside. "Derek," Madison said, "I'm proud of the person you've chosen to become. But remember that change is a daily choice, not a one-time decision. You'll face situations throughout your life where you'll have to choose between taking the easy path and doing what's right." Derek nodded seriously. "I know. But every time I'm tempted to use shortcuts or take advantage of someone weaker, I remember how it felt when you showed me what I really was. I never want to be that person again." As students began filing into the classroom for the day's final period, Madison reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this point. Tyler Brennan was now enrolled in anger management counseling and had started a peer support group for students dealing with family pressure and expectations. Marcus Webb had used his analytical skills to design the school's new bullying prevention curriculum and was planning to study social psychology in college. The three families had undergone their own transformations. Derek's father had implemented ethics training for his company and established a scholarship fund for students from low-income families. Marcus's mother had resigned from the school board and was now volunteering with organizations that fought institutional discrimination. Tyler's uncle had initiated reforms in the police department's handling of school-related incidents and youth crime. But perhaps the most significant change was in the student body itself. A culture of silence and fear had been replaced by one of mutual support and accountability. Students who witnessed bullying now intervened instead of looking away. Victims found their voices instead of suffering in silence. And potential bullies faced immediate consequences from both peers and adults. As Madison began her lesson on the civil rights movement, she drew parallels between historical struggles for justice and the recent transformation at Roosevelt High. The same principles that had driven social change throughout American history, courage in the face of opposition, persistence despite setbacks, and the understanding that systems only change when people demand better had proven just as relevant in a small-town high school. "Who can tell me," Madison asked her class, "what it takes to change an unjust system?" Kevin's hand shot up immediately. "It takes someone willing to stand up when everyone else is looking down. Someone who refuses to accept that this is just how things are. It takes people finding their voices," added Sarah Martinez, a junior who'd started the school's new peer counseling program. "Victims need to know they're not alone and that speaking up can actually make a difference." Derek raised his hand hesitantly. "It takes people in power admitting they were wrong and choosing to be part of the solution instead of defending the problem." Madison smiled, seeing the wisdom that had emerged from their collective experience. "All excellent points. But what's the most important factor in creating lasting change?" Tyler spoke up from the middle of the classroom, his voice carrying hard-earned understanding. "It takes time and continued effort. You can't just fix a broken system and walk away. You have to keep working to make sure it stays fixed." As the final bell rang and students gathered their belongings, Madison felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She'd found her mission in civilian life, not just teaching history, but helping to create it. Every day at Roosevelt High, she was proving that one person's courage could inspire others, that corrupt systems could be dismantled and rebuilt, and that even the most entrenched cultures of abuse could be transformed into communities of support and growth. 6 months ago, Madison Carter had been a substitute teacher trying to find her place in the world. Today, she was a permanent member of a community she'd helped transform, surrounded by students and colleagues who'd learned that real strength comes from protecting others, not exploiting them. The 3 boys who'd once dumped ice water on substitute teachers now spent their afternoons mentoring younger students and their weekends volunteering at community service projects. The school that had once protected bullies through systematic corruption now served as a model for institutional reform. And in room 237, where fear had once ruled, Madison Carter continued teaching the most important lesson of all, that when good people refuse to stay silent, even the most powerful systems of oppression can be overcome. Roosevelt High School's transformation was complete, but its impact would ripple outward for generations, proving that sometimes the greatest victories come not from winning battles, but from changing the hearts and minds of those who thought they were enemies. The substitute teacher who'd refused to be intimidated had become a permanent force for justice, and the bullies who'd thought they were untouchable had learned the most valuable lesson of their lives, that true power comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.